Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Wario Land 2. Welcome to Alternate Chapter 2, Story 5, Defeat the Cave Master. In the last part, we went through a majority of Alternate Chapter 2 here. Now we're going to go finish it off, and I should note, actually, we're not actually going to get an ending out of this alternate chapter. This is one of the few alternate chapter sets in the game that actually doesn't have its own ending tied to it. You can tell on the treasure map if a alternate chapter has an ending directly tied to it, if it ends in a little scroll like the ending with the main campaign or in the previous chapter. Honestly, I like that they have one that just doesn't lead to an ending all the same, because it means there is a literal alternate chapter that you can go into in the main flow and nothing will really change. Honestly, I'm kind of surprised how few games that do this general kind of level structure do that exact thing. Well, the only times I can really think of they do it to that extent even was, Rondo of Blood, considering every stage has an alternate stage that takes up the same place in the plot, but it can go back and forth between the alternate stages at will. And I really like that. God, Rondo of Blood is such a cool game. I gotta get to do an LP of that. Now, I do treat this level a little differently than some of the other levels in the LP, in that I actually speed up a good amount of it, because what a good amount of this level is, if you're going for as much money as you can, is a giant maze of breakable walls, ceilings, and floors, kind of like that one level back in the main campaign's Chapter 5. But since it's optional largely, I'm just going to speed up most of it just to help speed up the pace of this specific part. There are a lot of extra rooms here and extra coins you can find, but feeling your way out to get them all can take long enough that I can see it turning some people off and not feeling worth it. I'm largely doing it to showcase that extra room down there, because there's some good extra coin you can get in here. What you need to do here is break the enemy blocks with the small rocks, while somehow avoiding hitting the bats that are down there that can grab you and unflatten you. What you want to do is actually jump on top of them while holding up to get the bounce up into that main room there. But if you're a little off, you'll end up having to re-enter the room, which thankfully isn't that bad, but it could have been a lot worse. In fact, thinking about it a little bit, it's not even funny to me how much worse this game would feel if puzzle areas like this had the enemy blocks respawn upon entering and exiting the room because you messed up and you just had to start again from zero. Also kind of like some Metroid puzzles work, looking at that one speed booster jump room in Metroid Zero Mission in Ridley's Lair. If you've played, you know the one. At this point though, let's start going over the people who are thanked in the special thanks section of the game's credits. I went over the non-individual entities mentioned in it last time, but let's actually start the people. So the first person credited who is in both versions is Shinya Sano. Their first credit is all the way back in Super Metroid as doing some printed artwork for the game. They were then a designer on Teleroboxer, so they were part of R&D 1 for a good while too. Then they were in the special thanks for the Game Boy Camera, Famicom Detective Club Part 2, and this. But then they became the designer of Kirby's Star Stacker. They worked on all three N64 Pokemon Stadium titles, as in the two we got, as well as the first one over in Japan that only had like 60-some-odd Pokemon. They then worked on Wario Land 3 and 4. They were the designer of the Fusion suit in general, effectively, for Metroid Fusion. Then they were on Mario Power Tennis, Mario Golf Advance Tour. They did the Masterpieces mode for Brawl. They were a coordinator for Yoshi's Crafted World, Box Boy and Box Girl. They were a project manager. And their two of the more recent credits at Nintendo are on Another Code Recollection and Princess Peach Showtime. After him, next up in the special thanks section is Hirofumi Matsuoka. His first game was working on as a character designer on the original Metroid, then he was on Famicom Wars as a designer. He then did design for Super Mario Land, was a debugger for Metroid 2, directed Game Boy Wars and Mario Paint. He was a background designer for Super Metroid. He directed the Virtual Boy Wario Land, as well as directed, I think, all 4 of the N64 DD Mario Paint follow-ups. He then directed Wario Land 4 and did a lot of work for the early WarioWares, but around that exact same period, he actually left Nintendo proper to work at Creatures Incorporated. He's been working on Pokemon spin-offs ever since. Game design for Shadows of Omnia, planning for Pokepark Wii, Pokepark 2, they were a planner. Detective Pikachu on the 3DS, they did game design. And they were a creative director on the very recently released mobile phone Pokemon TCG game, which I have yet to check out because, frankly, my experience with trading card games has told me I should not play trading card games because I get a little too into them in a way that is not healthy for me. With that said, I will forever represent Cyber Dragon archetype in Yu-Gi-Oh! That shit is fun as hell to work with. Unless you're playing against it, in which case it starts being really unfun really quickly. Before we get back to the special thanks section, though, we're actually coming up on the boss of this stage, which is one of the easier bosses in the game, but one I think is also the easiest one to mess up on and get ejected out of the boss fight during. But in that regard, also in a lot of regards, it feels like it's the closest thing to being a boss from the first game, potentially because there was also a very similar boss in the first game. We got this boar here. It raises its eyebrow and then dashes across the screen. While it's got a dust trail falling behind it as it's trying to slow down at the ledge, you bash into its back and it falls off and does damage. As you get into the fight, it'll start jumping to try and trick you out so you can fall off yourself. At minimum, on every hit after the first one, it's guaranteed to do that at least once, but I think you can do it upwards of 3 times in a row, which can really mess you up if you're trying to be really greedy. Once it's turning red, you're almost done. Just gotta do one more hit. It only takes 3 hits to take this boss out, which is why it's also one of the easier bosses in the game in my eyes. Honestly, there's something I really like about this series' bosses, where at least they work with a single solid concept that works with the game's mechanics. I do wish here in Wario Land 2 especially, they used more of the states for Wario during boss fights, but that's something they would do, especially more leaning into later games, so at least they realized they could do that. Although at times it was more as a punishment, but that's an entirely different bit of that. Like I've already said though, alternate chapter 2 here doesn't lead to an ending, it just leads into chapter 3 outright. So in order to get our next set of 5 hidden stages, we want to head to main chapter 2 story 4 to get the alternate exit there. And if you think about the level design that I showcased during the main level here, you might have already an idea where the alternate exit is. We want to head to the giant eye-shaped room pretty early on in the level. From here, we want to break this pillar and then go grab the duck from above us, because the pillar to the left of the one we just broke is also breakable. It's made of unmarked enemy blocks. With that said, this is arguably some of the most precision throwing in the game because the arc that enemies have when you throw them a short distance can lead to picking them back up within the same area being weirdly precise, but thankfully, because of the way enemies get bonked off when you pick them up like that, you can eventually get them back into a state where you can just pick them back up again. I've had plenty of times doing this level where I just kind of throw it straight in and it makes a staircase within the area itself, and getting the enemy back up from there is just a nightmare. Though if you do get them into a really rough position, what you can just do is go and leave them off screen, let them respawn, or leave the room and re-enter and just try again. It's annoying if that happens, but it works. Thankfully though, this is the hardest part about getting this specific hidden exit. Because the room after this is pretty straightforward, same with where the actual exit is. This room's big thing is you knock the stove around to get some money and then eventually get it into place to use it as a platform to reach the exit to this room. I won't lie though, it took me absurdly long to get those coins directly below me right now. I don't think I got those until at least my second playthrough of the game. What it is that those coins are directly above a 1-tile wide passageway you have to crouch through to get to the exit of the room. You just gotta jump up in the middle and break a breakable ceiling there. I don't know why, just with the way the level design here is laid out, especially with the little platforms in the corners that are like bolted, I figured there was a breakable wall I had to get through to get to those, but no, it's just a ceiling and I was really overreacting to it. Wait, no. Overthinking. Overreacting is definitely the wrong word there. That happens to me surprisingly often. I'll notice it in editing, I just use the wrong word and I'm like, how did I not notice that? There's times where I think my mouth just desyncs from my brain and uses a word that's close to what I need, but not quite what's actually intended. And let me tell you, it's really annoying, especially when you edit as many videos as I do and you just notice it so often. With that said, the end of this level is pretty fun. We get to enact a little bit of revenge on Captain Syrup for what her pirates did to Wario's own castle, and there's a level to that I really appreciate. In fact, honestly, this game is funnier than I give it credit for, I think. It's just that I'm used to what it's doing. On a first playthrough, some of this stuff really does make you just get on those lighthearted chuckle smiles. You know the type, you know the type. Time to sink the boat. And thus we get to access alternate chapter 3. welcome to Alternate Chapter 3, Ruins at the Bottom of the Sea, Story 1, Escape from the Teacup. I was thinking about it, I called the first set of 5 hidden stages we did Alternate Chapter 2, if memory serves. Though it's more like an Alternate Chapter 1 on the whole. So what's funny is this first level really is an Escape from the Teacup. Well, a lot of the level design here is just the level design from the prior level and a little bit extra that's actually now been flooded by water in a way that's honestly pretty endearing. I know some people would call them reusing a level design and just adding something to this lazy, but honestly, I think it's really fun if you can make it work well. It's partially why I really like really well done Metroids and Metroidvanias, because the redefinition of level design by later abilities I think is a really cool thing. Though there are times where it gets to be a little bit like, okay, I got a checklist of things I now gotta go do. Like as much as I really like the new Prince of Persia, The Lost Crown, which I'm still mad that team of that got effectively dissolved. That's really messed up. There are times in that specific type of Metroidvania where I see the interactable off to the corner of a side for a new ability that I don't have yet, and I go, well, assuming there's no little good loop arounds to get back here, I'm gonna be coming back here later to take care of that, probably for exactly 1 item. And that game did fall into that trapping relatively regularly, but I still had a lot of fun with it, so it didn't matter too much. Honestly, probably one of my favorite Metroidvanias I've played in the last couple of years. The boss fights were really good. I gotta do an LP of that at some point, but not anytime soon. There's a lot of other games I have on my list already. While we explore the now flooded hallways of the SS Teacup, let's get back to talking about the game's special thanks development staff. The next person credited is Masahiko Mashimo. They were a designer for Super Mario Land 1, and then they were a graphic designer for Frog the Bell Tolls. They're a familiar face for the Wario Land series, though, because they were also a testing player for Wario Land 1. They were a background designer for Super Metroid, and I believe also notably in that case, they were the character designer for Crocomire in general. So they're part of the reason why you were meant to feel bad for Crocomire at the end of that boss fight. They were designer for Wario Land 3. They were then the special thanks for Trace Memory. They supervised Elite Beat agents. They were general support on Pushmo World. Their most recent credits are in the Nintendo Badge Arcade on 3DS, Mario vs. DK Tipping Stars on Wii U. They were a coordinator, and they were a stamp editor for Twilight Princess Wii U. Which, man, that's a feature that's kind of been made useless by the passing of time and the death of Miiverse. Huh. I miss it dearly. So weird thing about this next room, there's actually a unique object in it. This is a jug. You jump on it, it works as a platform, but if you get out to the corners, it actually slowly rotates. There were versions of this used in the code that I believe were not in water levels. Alternatively, there was also, I believe, a fish in this room in some either pre-release screenshots or in the Game Boy release specifically, which, weird that this one little room has that much little things going on in it, but I guess it shows this game's changing development. If memory serves, this game came out in '98, but pre-release screenshots for like press and all that shows it was meant to come out at one point probably in '97 instead, so they ended up delaying it for one reason or another. Next up in the special thanks section, there was another returning cast member of sorts from Wario Land 1, Kota Fukui, where they were a test player in the last game. They were a technical advisor for Frog the Bell Tolls. They were a debugger for Metroid 2 Return to Samus. They were one of the photo models for the Game Boy camera, but they were a programmer for Pokemon Red, Blue, and Yellow, as well as Wario Land 4. They programmed some tools for Metroid Fusion's development. They did some stuff on the early Wario Land games. Their last project was Metroid Zero Mission in the NCL special thanks, as they left the company probably around the time of the restructuring that happened in that period. So they haven't been in the industry at this point for over 20 years. Following them up is yet another returning cast member from the first Wario Land, another testing player even, Tomoyoshi Yamane, which if you remember that LP, you'll know this person's pretty iconic because they're the person who designed Samus's shoulder pads for the Varia suit in Metroid 2. Otherwise, their first game was Diva Story 6 as a character designer. They did Pokemon modeling for Pokemon Stadium, all 3 of them, just like we saw earlier with someone else. They were the special thanks for Puzzle League. They did the graphic design for Puzzle Challenge on the Game Boy Color. They were a designer for Wario Land 4. They were on the game staff for Melee. They did game design for Metroid Fusion. They supervised Prime 2 Echoes, namely with Samus's model, I believe. They were an associate producer for Mario Party DS. They were a supervisor for Brawl. Largely, though, they've been a producer of special thanks ever since. Some of their more recent credits over the years are being the special thanks for, like, the later Mario and Sonic games. Hey Pikmin, they were in the graphic UI supervision team. Mario Tennis Aces, they were an art director. and Mario Golf Super Rush, they were an art director. They're also a graphic supervisor on the recent Mario vs. Donkey Kong remake. Alternate Chapter 3 Story 2 is actually one of my least favorite levels in the game. Largely because I just don't think it's a fun structure to go through compared to all the other ones. The way this one's laid out is you start off just going downwards. In fact, you're traveling downwards the entire level. But at 3 points, there are branching paths left or right. You want to check out many of those branches left and right to get extra coins, on top of finding the treasure room and the exit. But the way this level ultimately works is you don't backtrack upwards, the level loops vertically. So you have to continuously make your way back to the start just to make your branch the other direction, and there's ways to make this type of level feel good. I think because of this game's general platforming pace and design, it just feels off. There are levels this could have worked in. Hell, this could have worked in the first game, I think, probably decently well. But for their first attempt at doing this in the Wario Land 2 onward structure, I'm not the biggest fan. I do love the visuals, though. Honestly, Alternate Chapter 3 is one of my favorite tile sets in the game. Something about the green partnered with the golden / brown, yellowish brown for the pillars just really looks good. I like it a lot. I love Game Boy Color palettes, as I've said earlier in the LP. Genuinely just such a good color limitation in a way that leads to some very well-mixed visuals, usually. Honestly, when I think about very impressive Game Boy Color stuff, though, a couple things immediately come to mind. For one thing, the early game cutscene visuals in the Oracle games and the credits images especially. And this one's a little more divisive to some people. The cutscene images in Metal Gear Solid Ghost Babel, I think, are gorgeous. The art style I can see not being for everyone, but I think the fact they made those shots look as cool as they do on a Game Boy Color for a Metal Gear game and still have it feel fitting, I think that's incredible. Ghost Babel is such a cool game, even if structurally it really is just Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake 2, but also not, because the narrative is completely disconnected, though they really clearly had plans to follow up on it at some point that I'm really sad they never did. I would have loved to see what they could have done with the sequel to that. Getting back to the special thanks section, the next person credited is another returning cast member from Wario Land 1. They were a programmer there, Isao Hirano. Their first project was on Metroid 2 as a programmer. They were then in the special thanks section of Mario Paint, and then they were uncredited in the special thanks section of Super Metroid. And by that I mean apparently people did hacking, and they found a couple of people's names in the special thanks section that weren't actually used in the credits. So they were removed for one reason or another. Maybe their contribution wasn't notable, or whatever they were working on just never ended up being used, so they removed them or something like that. I still think they probably should have been in there if that was the case, though. After that, though, they were the main programmer for Telero Boxer. They were in the special thanks for DKC3, of all things. And after this, they were the logic editor for Famicom Detective Club Part 2. They were a designer for Wario Land 3 and 4, and they did enemy designs for Metroid Fusion. Getting close to the end, though, our next person in the special thanks section is Jim Warnell. His first game was on Metal Combat Falcon's Revenge on the Super Nintendo in the special thanks section. He was then in the special thanks for Kirby's Dream Course, as well as Galactic Pinball and the Virtual Boy. Their first non-special thanks section was in Pilot Wing 64 as being part of the project arrangement stuff at Nintendo. They were on the NOA production analysis team on Mario RPG. They did screen text for Mole Mania. They were on English version staff for Star Fox 64. Special thanks is literally where they usually are, like F-Zero X, Wario Land 2 here. Link's Awakening DX, they were on English script. Excite Bike 64, they were on documentation. Metroid Prime, they were on special thanks. Ocarina of Time Master Quest on GameCube, they were on the manual editing team. He did artwork for Pokemon Box, Ruby and Sapphire, as well as Legend of Zelda Collector's Edition on GameCube. Geist on GameCube, they were on special thanks. Mario vs. Donkey Kong, they did packaging design. Largely, if memory serves from doing other research, they were a graphic designer at Nintendo that left circa 2006 or so. And our final person credited is Kayomi McDonald. Largely, she was a translator for Nintendo. Telero Boxer, Kirby's Avalanche, Mario Tennis, their earliest projects are Galactic Pinball, Vegas Stakes, and the special thanks. Manual text translation for Mario 64 and weirdly Star Wars Shadows of the Empire, Mole Mania, Mario RPG, Star Fox 64, Yoshi's Story. Up until around late 90s, I think, is when they would have left based on everything, because everything after that is re-releases of games that already existed, like Star Fox 64 3D, English version staff, Star Fox 2, special thanks, SNES Classic, special thanks. I actually can't help but wonder if the reason she's in special thanks is maybe because she maybe either translated for the team to help get communications between the US and Japanese side, or if she literally just translated and localized the text that's within the game, there's just not enough to make its own localization or translation credit. So they just were like, yeah, we'll throw you in special thanks with all the other people whose roles we don't exactly have a separate credit for. That wouldn't surprise me too much. But with that, I'm gonna need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 12, we're gonna continue through alternate chapter 3 before seeing where we head off to next. See you guys then.